Up next for our second keynote, I want to invite Shayoni Lynn. She's the founder and CEO of Lynn Group, a multi-award-winning behavioral science communications consultancy. She's listed in the PR Week Power Book. What is that? That's the definitive list of the most influential and most respected communication professionals in the UK. And she's listed for 3 years in a row, 2021, 22, and this year, 23. This year, she's also included in the Global 15 to Watch list by Provoke Media. Shayoni has received the Mark Mellor Award for the outstanding contribution to the industry. And today, when she comes on stage, she will talk on using behavioral science to power PR. Ladies and gentlemen, Shayoni.
Hi, everyone. Let me get this adjusted because, short. Hi. So thank you very much for inviting me today. My name is Shayoni Lynn. I am CEO and founder of Lynn, a behavioral science communications consultancy based in the UK but operating globally. And thank you to PRAXIS, to Amit and everyone for inviting me to talk to you about something I am very passionate about, which is about using behavioral science to power public relations. Let's get this working. There we go. Right. So what is behavioral science? There are many definitions. Even within the industry, we can't be aligned in one definition. But I'll use Matt Wallert's definition, which is behavior as an outcome, science as a process. Because we are talking about applied behavioral science, which is implicitly about changing behaviors. Behavioral science helps unlock why people do what they do. It provides a deeper understanding on the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious motivations, barriers, and influences that drive our everyday decision-making. It can help explain why humans behave the way that they do, and often predict how they will behave in the future. So what drives behavior? There are psychological drivers, environmental drivers, sociological drivers, and all of these drivers are important to understand and interpret to be able to inform recommendations. Apologies. So at Lynn, we're about changing behaviors through education and persuasion, never through manipulation. And I'm very clear about that because behavioral science can have a negative reputation. So we're about preserving agency and ultimately helping people make the best decisions for themselves, which hopefully results in lives saved and lives improved. This gentleman is David Halpin. He's the chief exec of the Behavioral Insights team. You might know him, or you might know the team as the UK's Nudge Unit. And he asked, do we stumble blindly, or do we seek to understand these influences and choices? The answer is that we can't afford to stumble blindly, not anymore. Now more than ever, we need to embrace a data-driven approach to strategic communications and a much deeper understanding of human behavior. So this is not always about what your audiences do, such as engage with you on your social media or even respond to your calls to action. It's also about understanding the subconscious and unconscious motivations and biases that exist in all of us as a species. And Fazana did a great prompt for their speech. I should ignore 5 slides. And the opportunities and challenges that these present, especially to us as communicators. Because we make a lot of decisions as human beings that can't often be explained through a rational lens. So let me outline some examples, give you some scenarios. You might want to reflect on them, and if you've been in those scenarios before, if you've experienced what I'm going to discuss with you, you might then want to consider the nuances and the complicated ways that we make decisions. So 3 scenarios. Scenario 1. So you've met someone for the first time. It could be for personal or for business reasons. You've met them in a pub or a bar, because let's be honest, that's where the best meetings happen, certainly in the UK. And they buy the first round of drinks, so you feel inclined to buy the next. Scenario 2, you're at a train station or at an airport. Your fellow passenger taps you on the shoulder and asks if you could please keep an eye on their bags whilst they pop to the loo. Now, normally you wouldn't notice, but now you're extra vigilant. And scenario 3, right, you're on holiday. So you're walking down these lovely cobblestone streets, you stumble upon this bistro, it looks lovely, you love the look of it, you love the menu, you love the vibe. Just to be certain, yeah, let's check TripAdvisor. And then we find that it's actually really poorly rated. So you decide to go to a top 10 TripAdvisor recommended restaurant instead. So if any or all of the scenarios seem familiar, that's because we nudge and are nudged on a daily basis. And that's how our brains are wired. And we don't even pause to notice it. So the more we understand how our audiences subconsciously and unconsciously behave, the choices they make and why, the way they perceive our content and communications, and their actions as a result of it, the better we'll be able to design environments where our audiences can thrive. Because I don't think an intuitive understanding, just singularly an intuitive understanding of who we are talking to is good enough anymore. Because we must bring the best methods to better understand our audiences and their behavior into our communications programs, as well as embrace scientific methodology, rigor, and experimentation, and apply this robustly to our practice. So in order to do that, it's important to understand how we process information, how we retrieve information. So lots of schools of thought in behavioral science, while today briefly touch on heuristics and biases. And so Fazan again prompted me on that, which is the mental shortcuts that we take for our everyday decisions. So just like our body has automatic processes, our heart pumps blood into our veins, we are breathing every single second without really noticing it, so does our brain. The reality is that we make a majority of our daily decisions with these automatic processes. So you've got two sides to the brain. System 1, which is our automatic brain, and this part of the brain is rapid, it's instinctive, intuitive, and impulsive. It's all about that gut reaction. It can be trained, but with plenty of repetition. So basically, when we think about the word thinking, that's not what your automatic brain does. And guess what? It cannot be turned off. And then you have system 2, which is your reflective brain. It's deliberate, it's capable of reasoning. It's self-conscious, it has self-control. But that even requires a lot of attention and effort. So it is what we think of as conscious thought. Sadly, the thing is, our system 2, our reflective brain, is rather lazy, so quite difficult to activate. So we try to cope in this complex world in which we cannot afford to think deeply about every choice we make. We therefore adopt sensible rules of thumb or mental shortcuts for our decision making. These are called heuristics, but as we've seen, heuristics can lead to systematic and sometimes predictable errors. And these are known as cognitive biases. So what does that mean in practice? So at Lynn, we use formative and summative research to better understand populations so we can drive the right outcomes. When we look at a problem, vaccinations, for example, we undertake local primary research in-house to understand the motivations, barriers, influences, and norms of that population before we design intervention recommendations. That is communications, creatives, calls to action, telling them why they should undertake that behavior. Because do they know how they can access the vaccinations? Can they access the vaccination clinic? Can they access the vaccination booking link? What are the social and cultural norms when it comes to vaccinations? So a lot of the issues that we deal with at Lynn, especially in public health or at the intersection of public health and climate change, are quite complex. So it's really important to have that quality research, and certainly an important part of a behavioral science approach underpinning intervention recommendations, that is development and strategy, before creative and execution. Diagnosis. So traditionally, mass behavior change comms has been viewed through the lens of awareness raising, right? So you have an existing behavior, you raise awareness, i.e. you let audiences know through messaging that there's a new behavior, and voila, they've adopted the behavior. Wish it were that simple. So we know that's not the case. So instead, what we focus on is understanding what is the problem that we're trying to solve. Who are the people that we're trying to speak to? What are the behaviors we're trying to create, maintain, or influence? What are the barriers to that behavior through the lens of informational, structural, cognitive, social? This helps us diagnose the problem correctly in order to identify the right intervention solutions. Experimentation. So we're the only UK agency that has embedded experimentation across all our campaigns. Why is experimentation? So we test our intervention recommendations with our target population, so the creatives, content, calls to action, via randomized trials. And we do so in both field settings and control lab settings. By doing this, we are securing data insights and therefore increasing confidence that our solutions will work when activated. Because there's a huge replication crisis in the world of behavioral science. What works today may not work tomorrow. What works in this context may not work in the next context. So it is critical to adopt experimentation to test the effectiveness of solutions before activating. An evaluation is critical to demonstrate the effectiveness of our approach to business and organizational objectives. So we set baselines and adopt real-time monitoring to ensure that we can take an iterative learning approach during the lifetime of a campaign. So we're not just looking at active monitoring, which is the impact of strategy and interventions via summative research like pulse surveys, and then the prevalence of a new behavior, which in our context would be monitored systematically anyway. What we're trying to do is monitor the change process and attribute the impact of communications to real-world behavior change. So what does this mean in real life? So this is a campaign we ran a couple of years ago called Don't Miss Your Vaccine. And you might remember our Prime Minister from back then, Boris Johnson, no comment, who decided to lift all COVID restrictions in 2021. What you might not know is that this was done with the backdrop of huge vaccine hesitancy in the UK. So the hypothesis was that when the priority vaccination program moved into mass vaccination, that the take-up would be much, much higher. Sadly, the opposite happened. So we saw high levels of vaccine hesitancy in the younger cohorts, specifically 18 to 29. So in Southeast London, which is where we ran this campaign, data indicated hesitancy and lower levels of take-up amongst younger people, especially BAME communities. So this July deadline of Freedom Day was looming, and our client knew that they were in a race to reach and persuade as many young people to take the vaccine as possible. So we turned this campaign around using behavioral science methodology in 1 week, never again. And we were able to do this because we had already undertaken quite a lot of primary behavioral research within this audience group in England, and we also knew the geographic and demographic area in Southeast London very well. We found key insights such as young people feeling scapegoated and not recognized for the sacrifices they'd made. They were anchored at the start of the pandemic to believe that they weren't at risk, but we know that the Delta variant changed everything and they were much more at risk, young people, but that wasn't communicated well. And they also continued to display quite a level of stoicism and sacrifice. So we heard in focus groups, I will give up my spot to allow someone more vulnerable to take my vaccine. And using behavioral science frameworks, specifically the behavior change wheel and COM-B, which is a behavioral diagnostic tool, we diagnosed the problem locally to find some key insights. So optimism bias. I've not had COVID yet, I'm fine. I don't need the vaccine. Status quo bias or inertia, the preference to be passive, to have the current state of affairs, to defer our decision making. Present bias or hyperbolic discounting. So choosing immediate short-term gains over long-term gains. So smaller, sooner rewards rather than later, larger rewards. So all of this manifested in these groups pushing their risk thresholds and demonstrating hesitancy, a lack of urgency in accessing the vaccine. So this diagnosis was crucial because it helped us create an easier path to target behaviors, including the key recommendation, which was to deliver the campaign to the lens of freedom and personal benefit. And that's a quick slide on audience segmentation, won't stay on that. So the campaign ideation. So as I said, we harness the power of personal benefits alongside health benefits to incentivize and motivate young people to access the vaccination. So the rest of the UK's messaging was focused on protecting yourself and your communities. But we latched on to this key behavioral insight. Do it for yourself. Do it for going to the pub. Do it for going on holiday. Do it for going on that first date. Do it for yourself. So Don't Miss Your Vaccine was the first campaign that reframed vaccinations into a positive personal benefit lens which harnessed agency. It, as a creative brand identity, strategically connected vaccination with personal benefits, rose above that noise of all the other public health messaging, and actively promoted vaccine take-up with a positive lens. It's become a big umbrella campaign. It's been running for over 2 years and continues and spans the breadth of vaccinations currently. This gives you a sense of the experiments that we ran. We didn't have a lot of time to run them, but you can see how the different age groups reacted to different behavioral frames and what was more persuasive to each segment. So this was an integrated campaign delivered over 4 weeks. It had the whole PESO mix. It was championed incredibly heavily locally within London. The Mayor of London was a big advocate for the campaign. So what? And that's the question to ask. Because we know that with the methodology and approach that we have at Lynn, we will deliver the reach, engagements, and conversions. So we can see here that all the objectives we set, we met, and in some cases exceeded. But the critical piece lies here, which is that with the work that we did with South East London, Lynn increased vaccinations within 18 to 29-year-olds by 77.8% improvement. And that is significant in 4 weeks within the context which we were operating. And we can also see that there was a sharp rise within most ethnicities, aged 18 to 29, and BAME rates increased faster since campaign activation. It's gone on to win several awards. It was recognized by the UK Cabinet Office. It was commissioned by NHS England to scale nationwide. So it's done really well for itself. But again, it goes to show that the methodology of behavioral science is not something that is academic and intimidating. It can be very fast-paced, it can be very creative, and it can land you those results. And I wouldn't be doing myself justice if I didn't just touch on disinformation. Because if you think about behavior change, if your job is to create or influence behaviors, then you have a responsibility to protect those behaviors from mis and disinformation. So disinformation is the proliferation of false information with intent. Misinformation is the proliferation of false information without intent. So in 2021, at Lynn, we launched the Misinformation Cell, which was the UK's first dedicated commercial unit for disinformation for PR and communications. And since then, 2 years on, it has been at the cutting edge of translating academic research into actionable intelligence and advisory for communicators, policy advisors, and risk officers. So what we're finding is that the threat from disinformation, which is extremely huge, disinformation is organized, it's sophisticated, it is monetized. And as communicators, we are waking up to that threat. We know it's a risk. But our response as an industry largely still remains quite tactical. We're all about, do we hide it, block it, delete it? Fair questions, but they're still reactive and not proactive. So I think we need to, as an industry collectively, in India, globally, we need to think about how we get ahead of this threat. How do we adopt a proactive lens to deal with disinformation when it occurs, because it's a when, not an if. It will be at your doorstep. So it is something that we should take really seriously. It's something that we should adopt into strategy and planning from the onset and have proactive ways of inoculating our audiences if we are to protect our organization's reputation, purpose, and bottom line. That's it from me. I can't see the clock because I'm short, but hopefully I'm on time. Thank you very much.
You're doing well on time, Shayoni. Thank you.